He has created a pharmaceutical cluster incorporating pills on wire. He is here to talk about the prophetic hoof of a cow.
Hello. Right. I'm Dean. A lot of people call me what? Do I need Dean?
Yeah.
All right. Quite often known as Wally Dean. I've been campaigning at Stonehenge for a number of years now. As many years as I can remember, really. Much will become apparent about that. Might be a little bit ropey today, the talk, because the slideshow thing that I wanted to use wasn't going to work so well, but we got an amazing postcard replacement, and David, my friend at the back there, is going to help me out with the slides. This is the ash box of Wally Hope. I'm going to tell you a story about how I became involved with it and about how everyone is a Wally. And many of you might have heard the expression, you're a Wally, he's a Wally, whatever, and I'd like to tell you that that's not a bad thing. I love being a Wally, and I want all of you to become Wallies in your heart, and that's the place to be a Wally. Basically, yeah, let's go for it. I've helped out over the last couple of years with a number of projects. One of my favourites being Travelling Days book from a neighbour of publications. In that I wrote a bit about Wally Hope. The story I'm going to tell you, just putting that in as a shameless plug because I got copies of it upstairs. So yeah, please come and see me afterwards if you want a copy. And like I say, everyone's a Wally. It was an all-encompassing idea. You'll understand more as I go along, and I'll settle down into my nerves when I'm out there up and roll up so that no one's right down. This is Wally. It was other known, his real name was Phil Russell. It wasn't even his real name, he chose Phil, meaning love, from the Greek. His real name was Alexander. He was from a wealthy background. His father was big in the ICI company, worked abroad a lot of the time. This is a picture of him from 1967, out in the garden of his guardians. He had, like I say, had a fairly happy childhood. His family were pretty affluent, etc. And he was able to do much of what he wanted to do. And then when he was 12, his father died, which had a terrible effect on the boy. John Snake, his guardian, who was a BBC broadcaster, he'd been asked by Wally's dad to be guardian in case anything happened to him. And John Snake said that after the death of his father, Wally totally plummeted, started getting into trouble at school, kicking off against parent at that time, his Danish mother. And you know, he had a rough time with the death of his father, and it left him with quite a substantial trust fund, which would come into play a bit later on. When he was 16, he attended the Aldermaston marches and was amazed at how many people would come together for a common cause, for something they believed in. And C&D was obviously a growing movement at that time. The Aldermaston marches every year were, I mean, thousands and thousands of people were marching. In his book he writes about Aldermaston March, and as I say, he was so blown away by how many people would come together for something they believed in, how much of a cross section of society you'd get from the hippies to their grandmothers almost. He also took part in the protests against the Vietnam War in Grosvenor Square. Rather large protests that happened in London, and unfortunately descended into aggro. Many people who would later become Wallies were involved with this, and through this, Wally became aware of the political power that mass movements could have. He was also obviously doing nicer things. I mean, Eel Pile Island in the River Thames was a favourite haunt. He came across this band, Pretty Things, who pretty much came and lived with him in a communal sense of the word. He had an old lodge house near Windsor, and he threw open the doors, and people were there taking acid, smoking dope, writing music, etc. And Wally loved this scene. You know, to him it was vibrant. It was everything he'd been looking for. Also used to attend quite regularly Roundhouse events. The Roundhouse was a squat in Chalk Farm in London. This is a flyer for All Night Rave, a word which will come back into my talk a bit later. But all night raves at the Roundhouse, lots of people were dropping acid. I mean, as you can see on the flyer, trips and happenings were all part of the bill. And through this he became friends with the counterculture, Ubi, Dwyer, John Hopkins, who ran the International Times magazine, which was a youth culture magazine at the time. Very political, very forward-thinking, etc. And as I say, London was suddenly different, because suddenly London had acid. LSD had hit the streets, and it was in fine supply. Wally was quite often found at the UFO Club, which was also run by John Hopkins, who I mentioned a moment ago, the International Times editor. And through this, as I say, he was becoming increasingly involved in youth culture, happenings. LSD, he started to evangelise about, claiming everyone should do it, they would set you free from the straight lines of the culture they were being brought up. And I mean, I can guess that some of you will understand this culture. I mean, the people after the war were, they were one of the richest generations that had come to its teenage years, and their parents were a bit messed up by the war, etc., and they wanted something different. So, acid was very different. And around this time, people started travelling out, getting buses, etc., which they were living in, and that was all part of the counterculture. We had Windsor in 1970, and Windsor was an absolutely massive festival. It was a paying festival, and many people turned up there, and it wasn't what their culture was spreading. Their culture was free music, free love, free people, free, and there it was, and it had massive fences around it, etc. We'll click another one. As I say, their belief was in free festivals, and they had guard dogs, they had guards. I mean, it was a very much thou shalt not unless you had a ticket. So what we ended up with was a massive camp out on the side of the festival. Apparently had a beautiful view. You could take in all the stage, you could see everything, but you weren't down in the throng of things. As you can see, people's anger was rising and rising against the fences, and the inevitability happened, and the fences came down. The festival was declared a free festival from that moment onwards. The artists, etc., weren't going to get paid as much as they wanted, and thousands more people poured into the festival. It's the Pink Fairies playing at a breach in the gate. They had a massive inflatable thing which they built, Canvas City, which you can see in the background there. And inside that it was basically an inflatable happening, and lots of people were getting into acid, were smoking their dope, etc. And it was a burgeoning culture. Now here's our man here, our man Wally. This is him in 1971, the Glastonbury Festival, which was to become another major stepping point in the move towards free festivals, because the festival had been run in 1970, but in 1971 Arabella Churchill and Andy Kerr came in and basically provided a lot of finances towards getting bands together, etc. And so it was a free festival. The Hyde Park diggers were there doing free food. People were living in teepees and were throwing these teepees open for anyone to crash out in. And the culture was really burgeoning. Let's say Glastonbury Fair. There's what is now the famous stage, but I mean in 1971 it was a very ramshackle thing. I mean, as you can see, the stage was so high above people. I mean, it was nearly danger of death falling off the front, etc. But that was the first pyramid that ever stood on that point on the ley line at Glastonbury. It was a point that was doused, to be honest, on a line between Glastonbury Tor and Stonehenge. Strangely enough, I mean, Wally would have been beaten to the Stonehenge festivals had Andy Kerr had his original wishes. I mean, when he flew back from South America, and he reports he'd done some acid for the flight, and he had a wonderful vision of a festival. But first of all, he wanted it at Stonehenge, and it was only through circumstance that he ended up being on the land where the Glastonbury Festival is still run now at Worthy Farm. But basically, while he was looking for land near Stonehenge, someone said to him, well, I've got a number of a bloke down in Glastonbury who might be doing what you want to do. So, who knows? I mean, the Stonehenge Festival could have been a whole different kettle of fish had Andy Kerr got involved with it, but that wasn't to be. During this time, many free festivals were springing up. This was a flyer that was made by a fellow called Ubi Dwyer. It was a rent strike, a People's Free Festival where everyone should be able to come, bring what you expect to find was the slogan, come along and try the culture with us. That's Ubi Dwyer there, standing up in the middle, a lovely Irishman who spent much of his time down in the Antipodes until he got into too much trouble down there for being an outlet for acid, etc. And he came back to this country and was well into the acid culture. This fella down here, this is our young Wally helping Ubi out with, this is a meeting for the 1973 festival. As a badge for the festival. And there's Ubi again. This is up in Hyde Park when he's promoting the festival. I mean, he's quite regular at Hyde Park. He'd quite often get into quite blown out arguments with some of the people who were shouting there, and sometimes be run off the side by the police. So anyway, they got the festival together. As you can see, it was within plain view of Her Majesty. I mean, they considered that they had a royal charter which gave them permission to have their festivities there. Ubi actually wrote to the Queen, and on this particular year, I think it's 73, and she declined to attend, but he took that as well. She didn't say you shouldn't be in my garden, and therefore took it, well, I'm up at Balmoral at the moment, actually, darling. And so he took it that, you know, she was all right about it. So, I mean, that gladdened him greatly. Obviously, Her Majesty sent her boys down to make sure it didn't get too rowdy in her garden. Unfortunately, a few times it did get too rowdy in her garden. These are the people who got together. There was a free press at the festival, something that would become regular at festivals. Most of the People's Free Festivals had their own newsletters which were being published every day. You know, just setting their presses on site, running off copies, handing them out, etc. Each festival also had a committee, and the committee would meet every day, and people could bring, you know, things that they weren't happy with, things that they thought might work better if they got together and did this, etc. So a committee, you know, it really was the people taking control of their own festival. It's an interesting picture. I sometimes ask the people who were at Windsor, etc., can you tell who the two... No policemen here, are there? Okay, there's two pigs in that picture, and basically the police have been very interested in this free festival movement. The government had commissioned a report in 1972, and during that report they were sort of like, well, it is really good for our young people to be getting out into the countryside, to be living with each other, to be having their festivities out of the way, to be learning how to interact with each other. But then 2 years later, the government wrote another report, the Stevenson report, which was sort of saying, oh no, we've got subversives there, feeding subversive ideas to our children, feeding them drugs, etc. And so, I mean, over the early years of the free festivals, I mean, that's how marked the government feeling about these festivals were, as they saw them grow and grow. So basically, there were many undercover agents working, getting themselves very heavily involved with the committees, the newspapers, because that would obviously be a good place to harvest information from. And the two couples in that picture, I mean, for anyone's interested there, those two, and they ended up being involved with Operation Julie in 1976, which was the biggest ever acid raid in history, as far as I know. Here's Wally at the same festival enjoying a band. Happened to know it was Ebbling Miss he was enjoying. Now, Wally had made friends. I mean, he came from Essex, and he lived in a village not far from this place. This place is Darl House, which will come into the story quite a lot. Darl House was a home, an open door commune, and was run by members of a band called Exit, who were an avant-garde band who Wally had got to know through through the happenings at the Roundhouse, etc. And like I say, they were only a few miles apart, so Wally was bound to end up at this place. And he went there and he started infusing about a festival at Stonehenge. And basically he'd been at Windsor in '73 and had been really bummed out because at the gates various people from the Polytantric Circle and the White Panthers, who were quite radical movements within the festival, quite subversive. I mean, obviously they were set up as the sister organisation of the Black Panthers, and so they'd been at the gate hassling hot dog traders, ice cream traders, etc. for a cut. And in one particular argument with an East London hot dog dealer, you know what I mean, East London hot dog dealer, it all got a bit heated. The bloke had stormed onto the side with his van intending to sell hot dogs, and his van ended up getting torched. And Wally saw that as a really bad thing. I mean, surely even the hot dog dealers, etc., were the free people. So he came up with this idea that he wanted a festival. And he chose, I mean, he was by this time he'd got quite into the idea of sun worship. He quite often sent letters home on which he would just sign "Your Son," S-U-N, Phil. And so he'd become a sun worshipper, and he considered that Stonehenge was the ultimate sun temple in this country. And it's a largely unattended place. It's not like what we've got now with Stonehenge, massive £1 million visitor centres. It was very much a pile of stones in a field at the side of a main road from London to Cornwall. So what possible damage could a few hippies hanging out there for a few weeks do? So he got this poster together. This is the poster for the 1974 Stonehenge Festival. This was made by G. Vorcher. The touring shroud was an image that Wally always carried with him, always carried it in his chest pocket as near to his heart as possible. I mean, Jesus was a major figure to Wally, but he didn't understand Jesus in the straight line way thinking. He saw Jesus as a person who brought all the people together and told them to love the neighbour and love each other, and you know, I mean, he saw many of the things in Jesus' teachings that maybe are coming out now with your, you know, the testaments that have been since found, Dead Sea Scrolls, etc., where it is far more of his teachings rather than the teachings of the people who later put the Bible together. So at Doll House, he's getting these posters together. Oh, there it is again. He also gets this, which is a broadsheet. Unfortunately, because of the computers, they shrunk down. But oh, it's got a lovely poem here. It's sort of there again. Got that's his actual touring shroud photocopied, and there's our man Wally down at the bottom doing a talk at Windsor in '73, etc. There you go, another lovely picture on the back. This down here is the Union Wally, because he reckoned that Britain was a beautiful country, but people didn't smile enough. So his flag was the Union Wally, and that flew at Stonehenge Festival for the solstice of '74. Being a public-minded person, he'd already written this letter to the farmer. Unfortunately, again, the computer shrunk it down a bit, but basically what he's saying is our Lord God and his Son Jesus Christ have ordained a spiritual pilgrimage to Stonehenge on the 20th of June, the 21st, etc., etc., to fulfill his two commandments: love God and love your neighbour. I won't read it all out. But basically, I mean, he even wrote to the farmers, etc., expressing a will to be friends, etc., and the festival came together in 1974. Besides the battered tape recorder, the only bands that played was Zorsch. This is the keyboards of Basil of Zorsch, and as you can see, I mean, people were camping right up to the very edge of the monument. And this, you know, over a period of the solstice. But then after the solstice, Wally talked 30 or 40 people into staying with him at Stonehenge and to actually try and reclaim the land. You know, he said that there was a deed of gift, basically. The fellow who was involved with the Chubb family, who you may all well know from Locks, etc., he'd bought Stonehenge in an auction at quite a good price, I mean, considering what it must be worth now. And he'd bought Stonehenge. His wife wasn't very happy with him, you know, getting this bit of land, so he ended up deed of gifting it, which meant he gave it over to the government to look after for the people. It's still a hotly disputed document, but basically Stonehenge was given to the government. The Ministry of Works took over responsibility for it, and basically Stonehenge became a public asset, you know, became something that was looked after by the government for us. So Wally could see no problem with having a festival there. I mean, we are the people, Stonehenge was given to the people, and therefore we'd look after it for a while. And there's our man, there's him getting down in the sunshine. God knows what he might have been on at that moment, but this is him. Strangely enough, for anyone who knows sound systems, the fellow who set up those speakers is now a multi-millionaire as far as speakers, etc. goes, because he invented the Turbo 1 rig and what is now the most popular sound system, the Opus sound, Function 1 sound systems. As you can see, you know, Wally was having a great time. I mean, here he is in his festival with his friends, you know, people are all camping out, some people living in vehicles, some people living in, yeah, that was a parachute. The police presence was very low, you know, and they were just keeping an eye on things, you know, making sure things didn't spill out of hand, you know. As you can see, Wally got on very well with the local coppers, etc. I mean, this one, I mean, one of the stories that's come out lately is that this young copper had been sitting there for quite a while talking to Phil and Arthur and a few of the other people at the camp, and during that time he'd had a nice cup of tea made for him in a pot which was used for holding hash oil. So how out of his face he was at that moment, I don't know. If you can see the whole photo, he's given a peace sign too, and that grin on his face, you know, I love him. Anyway, people were carried on, the festival's carried on moving. This is another picture from Windsor in '74, which was 2 months after the original Stonehenge camp. And at this festival, the police chose a very different tactic. On the, I think it was Monday after the festival, the police just lined up a thin, thick blue line, lined up all the way across the festival, and people were told, yeah, and this was 8 o'clock in the morning, people had been up all night partying, and they were told, well, you've got half an hour, start grabbing your possessions and get off this land. Oh, sorry, they've gone out of order. Okay, at the same time, Wally was also taken to court for the possession, for squatting on Stonehenge. Britain wants Stonehenge cleared, a religious group was one headline, but there were many more sort of saying, well, really, did they do much harm? This is coming from the other side, you know, this was really putting across their message, well, you know, even when the policemen come, we'll love them, and we don't want to move off of Stonehenge. God has told us to be at Stonehenge, and we'll love the policemen when they come, and if that fails, we'll move. So, basically, Wally lost the case at Stonehenge, and he got outside and he completely confused the press by coming out and saying, well, we've won, we've totally won. We've made friends with the judge, we've made friends with the lawyers, we've made friends with the reporters. What more could you want out of a day than to make lots of friends? And they asked him, well, haven't you got removed from Stonehenge? And he said, well, no, God's told us to be there, and you know, whatever we do, we will carry on being there. Now, he's at Windsor. This is him giving a talk before the police came in. Sorry. Yeah, as you can see, the press got well involved with Windsor. This is one of the headlines, etc. the day after. I mean, you can see it's heavily carrying pictures of people being beaten, etc. And Wally's there, and on that morning, after the police had been in, he invited everyone back to Stonehenge. I mean, it seemed like the natural thing to do. The fort was still being held at Stonehenge. I'm sorry I'm not using my computer, but this one shrunk down. But this is like Queen Arthur invites you to celebrations of our equinox at Stonehenge. And basically, a hell of a lot of people moved down from Windsor to Stonehenge. I mean, this is a few pictures of the Windsor still being cleared. You can see they had to come in quite heavy, you know, and it was face-to-face arguing the whole way. You know, the police were having to be heavy. Had some lovely stories about how many people ended up with coppers' hats after that day. Yeah, I mean, even the vehicles were being pulled apart and, you know, searched, anyone trying to move. One of their first orders was to destroy the stages. This had been a beautiful stage an hour before. They ripped off the PA, impounded it all, took down the stages. People resisted it to the end. Here's our friend Arthur Wally saying, well, you'll never take me alive, copper. Luckily they did, and he ended up back at Stonehenge. They didn't escort him. So anyway, Wally was much happy about his '74 festival and started getting on advertising another gathering the following year. This is a poster he made for the 1975 festivities. It was done by a fellow who was also heavily involved with International Times, Roger Hutchinson. And it's a beautiful poster. Him and Wally had sat down over a campfire at Windsor and talked about all the things he wanted in a poster. You know, you can't see it very clearly, but there's a couple of teepees at the side, there's Stonehenge with the sun coming up through it, and a druid lovingly looking down and keeping an eye on the whole thing. You know, like I said, starts 19th of June, and so he was advertising that. He got more newsletters together up at Dial House. It's also again using his touring shroud. There he is holding, there's the same copper again, holding a Union Wally, the flag I was telling you about, one you can see on my table, like I say, a Union Jack with a great big smiley face in the middle of it. Anyway, he's getting ready for the 75 festival, and about a month before the festival was going to kick off in May, he went down, he wanted to go down to near Salcombe in Devon. But he didn't make it that far because he stopped in and saw the Wallies at their squat in Amesbury, which was just up the road from Stonehenge. And during the night there, he got raided. He was arrested for possession of acid. Some people say that it was someone else's acid that he was looking after. Although that's a popular story, I'm coming round to believe that, you know, there weren't many times that Wally wasn't moving with acid. So he ended up in Windsor prison, and from there. See, I've got one ahead of myself with the pictures, right. While he was in Windsor, he complained that his prison uniform was making him itch. Now, he shouldn't have to wear prison uniform because he was on remand, he hadn't been charged. He went to the prison doctor, Dr. Scott, who, as he walked in, said, "Hello, Wally," or is it Phil? Which one am I talking to today? And basically, before Phil had even got in to see him, he'd diagnosed him as schizophrenic. You know, he was Wally Hope and he was Phil Russell. He was also Alexander Graham Russell. You know, he had a serious case of, as far as the doctor was concerned, of schizophrenia. I mean, the appointment only lasted 2 minutes. So he got sent off to this place. I mean, I think there's another picture of it. This is the Old Manor, a psychiatric asylum in Salisbury, where he was put in. He was given massive amounts of antipsychotic drugs, mood stabilizers, things that help you sleeping, etc. And I mean, Largactil, which was one of the drugs he was majorly given, was given a daily recommendation of 75 milligrams. They were given him 200 milligrams a day. I mean, the doctor would later on admit that, yeah, we were giving him massive doses, but the prisons almost, the mental hospitals almost seemed to be outside of normal what you could do. You know, the people were experimented on. They gave him masses of Largactil, and Largactil is known in the psychiatric industry as a medical kosh. Basically, he'd always wanted to plead guilty to the acid because he considered it a God-given right to have acid and that everyone should do it. I mean, during one of the earlier court cases when he'd been put on remand, he'd actually suggested that the judge and everyone on the jury should, everyone there should do it. He wasn't going to go down, but they told him that if he claimed guilty, he definitely wouldn't be out for the Stonehenge 75 festival. So he pleaded not guilty, and like I say, I mean, he was under medical treatment. He was really not himself to defend himself. So he pleaded guilty, and they kept him in for an indefinite time at, like I say, the Old Manor Psychiatric Hospital. The festival carried on without him. I mean, Penny, who was his friend from Dial House, went down to this festival and was sort of saying to people, look, Wally's been busted, why aren't you doing anything? But people were a bit like, oh, we don't want to know. And the people who were really involved at the Wally squats, etc., were in fear. You know, they were going to be taken next as far as they were concerned. And it was during looking into this one that I came across a police operation called Operation Stub. It had been roughly started up in 1972, but had grown and grown under the command of Dick Lee. And Operation Stub stood for Stop These Unlawful Free Festivals. One of their tactics, you know, that was laid out to them when they started off was to take the organisers of these festivals out of circulation. The idea being that if the spokesman, if the energy behind the festivals was held away, that the festival would somehow just peter out and not happen. But as you can see, here it is happening, and he's 12 miles up the road in a mental asylum, drugged out of his face, but his people are still doing what he wanted. Here's another picture of the 75 festival. I mean, you can see, I mean, lovely figures again. A much better turnout than the first year. And this was their response to it was put up masses and masses of barbed wire in coils. I mean, you can see that's 2 coils of barbed wire at the bottom with 1 on top, and behind that there was another fence. And these little things here, which some people might think are little massive magic mushrooms or something, they're actually spotlights. The whole place was lit up every night, and there you can see a couple of our festival goers sitting solemnly against the barbed wire fence. Wally's still in the old manor. Now they let him out 2 days after his second festival had happened. He was in such a mess that it took him 3 days to get back to Essex. He said he was stopping every now and, you know, he had to keep stopping to have breaks to get himself together. You know, it's a distance of about 75 miles that he had to cover. It took him a long time. Finally he got back to Dial House, and he was in a terrible state. I mean, luckily the people from Dial House had managed to visit him once twice in the old manor. They'd tried to get an escape plan together, knowing that if they could get him out of his section for 28 days, then he would be clear of it. But on the second visit, he was in just such a mess that they knew that without his compliance, they'd never get him out. So anyway, what is it? It'll be the 5th of July, 1975. He gets back to Dial House, and he's in a terrible state. G, who's quite into her health booze, starts giving him ginseng, various detoxifying drugs, etc., trying to clear all this medical stuff out of him. You know, Wally throws away his prescriptions, etc. You know, he's trying to get clear of what the medication has made him become. But he can't walk properly. He's having trouble eating. I mean, G talks about walking him out in the garden and not being able to put one foot in front of the other. Now, some people that he was really closely related to here, the Hatfields, were over in the next village. Now both of them were GPs, and through experts at St Margaret's and another hospital in Essex, they had young Wally diagnosed as having chronic dyskinesia. Now chronic dyskinesia is basically these drugs had caused such a blockage in his nerves messages to his brain that half the time he couldn't function in the way he wanted to. So, you know, he might want to get out and have a walk in the garden, but he couldn't because he couldn't walk. And also another one of the drugs, Welderm, which he had been treated with, had made him photosensitive, which meant if he went out in sunlight, he started to blister, he got really bad heat bumps, he'd be itching, he just wasn't comfortable. And this was a sun worshipper, you know, someone who loved the sun, that couldn't even sit in the sun now. And I mean, it was a sad time. You know, they had their friend back, but he was a broken man compared to what he'd left in May, you know, from the very same house. And they heard him every night in the bedroom where he was staying, crying. You know, I mean, it really was a broken man. Now, I mean, basically, through their treatment at Dial House, he started to feel a bit better. He ended up going back down to Branscombe and Salcombe in Devon, where he was also involved with a couple of communes. I'd love to tell you so much more about the story, but I'm keeping it brief. But I mean, a lovely thing. I mean, he's down in Salcombe and he's going to church services, etc. And people are walking around there at the church services on a Sunday, and they're topless and they're smoking dope and they're chilling out and they're getting on really well with the vicar, etc. And there's a public outcry about all these hippies turning up for these services, and the vicar's like, well, these are children of God, they've got as much right to be at this service. And he actually ran for council down in Devon so that he could help protect the hippies that he had down there. So anyway, he's gone back down to Devon and he wants to go to this. This was the Four People's Tree Festival, a very strange festival which ended up taking place at Watchfield near Swindon. And it was the only festival in British history where the British government acted with the Free Festival movement and gave them a site. I mean, the site that was first chosen, which was later used for Torpedo Town, the site that was first chosen had many snakes on it and was covered in gorse, so Sid Rawle turned that site down. And eventually an old airfield at Watchfield was chosen to be the site of the Four People's Tree Festival. The police, as part of the dealing with the government, were allowed to be on site. There was a great undercover operation. This poor lady here was a South Wales copper, And she'd gone down to the festival, and everyone was stripping off, and so what could she do to stay undercover? She got out of her covers, you know, she had to go, her duties every day were to walk around nude and collect information, you know. That's how serious they were about the surveillance operation. They also had a fella in here. Now in here, the government had worked out they could have a telephone, and that telephone was for contacting the press, and outside, you know, public services, etc. Now the person they had manning the phone was another undercover copper, so obviously anyone coming up with information was passing it to the copper, which meant that the copper had full records of what was going on, what was being said, how many people were, you know, and people were, you know, foolish, they were, you know, naive, etc. So they were sort of saying, well, we hope the acid turns up later, we hope, you know, like the call went out from Watchfield because there wasn't enough acid, and, you know, I mean, the police were actually dealing with all these things, and also deciding when people should be taken off, you know, as in busted, etc., off site. Here's a couple of the Wallies at Stonehenge, at Watchfield. This is a picture of Wally at Watchfield. I mean, he's very much a different picture to the fella I showed you earlier. Yeah, as in playing his flute again. Yeah, I mean, as you can see, he looked a very different person. And 4 days later, Wally Hope was dead. He died in very suspicious circumstances. He died on the floor at the GP's house. I mean, Sylvia, the GP who got back to him, said that she found him gasping, etc. But by the time the ambulance got him and took him off to St Margaret's in London, he'd been declared dead. There were inquests, etc. What should be fairly straightforward became yet again convoluted. The police toxicology laboratories took 3 months to get their results together, and in the end they decided that he died of an overdose of one of the drugs that he had been prescribed. Now this was argued, I mean, as I say, he was found dead on the floor of the GP's. The male GP started campaigning and saying, well no, this isn't right. If he'd have died of that, his lips would have been blue when Sylvia found him. There were too many things that didn't make sense. There'd also been a needle mark found in the first coroner's report that disappeared from the subsequent next 2 reports. I'd love to tell you loads more about the needle mark, but time says that I should wander on. But basically, Wally was dead. You know, I mean, he was 28, he had a beautiful life until he'd been arrested, and after his arrest he'd been hospitalised, sectioned, medicated to a point where he was hardly the person he was anymore. But the thing was, he'd given a speech at Watchfield. Like I say, he came from an affluent family, and 2 years after, a year and a half after Watchfield, he was going to be coming into a really significant, you know, £40,000 in 1976 would have been, I don't know what that would evaluate against now, but he was talking about buying lands near Stonehenge, etc., where he wanted to basically throw it open as the people's land. You know, anyone could go there, do as they wish, live in teepees, etc. It was a scary thing for them, but it never came to be. As John Snag famously turned up and said, well, there's no way it's a suicide. The police have ruled out the suicide. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. You know, going through various biographies of him, seeing if he mentions much, but unfortunately I can't find much more. But definitely, I mean, he was very much a public figure. You know, he's a BBC presenter who's well known for doing the boat race every year, and here he was sort of saying, well look, my ward, the person who I'm meant to be looking after is dead, and well no, it can't be suicide. And you know, there were many reasons why he didn't believe it was suicide. This is a picture from the obituary that was written for the International Times in 1975. As you can see, you know, Wally looks a different person to how he'd earlier looked. People went back to Stonehenge in 1976, and it was very much, you know, as much of it as it was a celebration of life, it was also a commiseration of death. You know, many of the people in the Free Festival movement were touched by the death of Wally, and there they are. You know, this is, you know, the extent of how close to the stones we got again. And another one. And this box that you see before you, was brought along to the solstice at Stonehenge. The box was made by Penny Rambo, who would a couple of years later form Crass, who became, you know, one of the major anarcho-punk bands of all time. Probably taught me more about life than I care to think. But anyway, the ash box was taken to Stonehenge. There's Penny and Sid opening it up during the service. And Sid doing his service over it. It upset Penny slightly that Sid took over with much of the officiating at the service. He cut out a few people that wanted to talk and sort of said, oh, we've got no time for this. And he basically took over the ceremony, and it went the way that Sid went. Sid will become a major figure in Stonehenge in years to come. There's a lovely picture of, as you can see, Wally's ashes in the bottom of this box here. Many of his friends coming and taking a handful. One story coming from Nigel about how it blew up into the air and loads of people nearby got it, getting it into their eyes and taking on Wally. It was a beautiful day. There's a sunset on the day that Wally's ashes were put out. Stonehenge stayed predominantly locked up. Although this is a festival in '76, as I say, when they're spreading Wally Hope's ashes, it was a massive festival, and the authorities didn't like it. There they are standing guard with almost like barbarian hordes at their gates. They don't know what to do about this thing. There's a couple more festival pictures. Skip on past that. This is it. So the Stonehenges started carrying on. Can we skip a couple more? The Stonehenges carried on going on. This is Stonehenge 77. That was Hawkwind on their stage, the Axon Henge stage they built. The police were still keeping an eye on this festival. Some information leads us to believe that during the negotiations for Watchfield, Sid Rule did a deal with the government that they would leave Stonehenge alone. And so basically they were there just monitoring. Well, that picture's jumped out of order. Now Penny, who was one of the inhabitants of Dahl House, he ended up getting this booklet together as much as he could remember of what Wally was saying. I mean, he had Wally's book, he was using bits of the book, he was using his own memories, other people had talked to him, obviously G had a bit of influence. And this is when I came to the Wally Hope story, even though I was there in '76 when the ashes went out, this is when Wally Hope's story became really important to me, because I'd kicked off. I'd sort of said, no Mum, I don't want to go to your hippie festivals. No Dad, I don't want to go to your hippie festivals. It's just all your friends getting off of it and going around naked, and I don't want to be part of that. And I'd gone off and I'd dyed my hair and I'd become a punk. And this was, one of the major bands that I was into, and here they were doing a story about the festival I just rejected. I just sort of said, no, I don't want nothing to do with that. And then I read this, and all of a sudden, I want a lot to do with Stonehenge. As you can see, the book is still printed. I've got a few copies upstairs. But like I say, if you want a background to Wally Hope, that is one of the great books. Like I say, I'm working on a book at the moment where Penny will be writing a little bit, and he will be writing about this book. Stonehenge has carried on until 1984. 1984, the festival was beautifully large. Wally's dream had really come to fruition. Here's Stonehenge down at the bottom here, and to give you an idea of the scale, people were all up in the woods camping. I very clearly remember running around in those woods, pretty much naked a lot of the time. And we used to have this game called Hunt the Hippie Turd, which I won't go into grossly, but it was great. You got a stick, you gave it a poke, oh, I got the hippie turd. Basically, it did make a lot more people bury their poo. But you can see the scale of the festival. And this was a month long, happening alongside, what was being marketed as one of England's tourist attractions. So there were thousands of American, Japanese, Chinese, whatever, tourists seeing all this going on. And many of the visitors to Stonehenge were wandering off into the festival, and some of them never came back. Well, not the same, anyway. Here's Sid Rule again, the fellow who negotiated Watchfield. He became very central. He became, Stonehenge is visited by a lot of freedom freaks, a lot of people who are seriously into their paganism. And Sid was able to take the two, almost like a druidism for the people. And, he did for many years hold Stonehenge together. I've got very good memories of him at Cholderton in '88, etc. He was a major figure in the Stonehenge movement. Another one, Bev, doing his services at Stonehenge in '84. People amongst you won't know names, but there's so many beautiful places in there. There's Alan Lodge. If anyone interested in this, go online and put in Alan Lodge, photographer. What the photos that man took over the years, quite a few of which are in this little presentation, but his website is beautiful. You know, you can learn so much. And I mean, this is coming up more to a modern day. I mean, whose heritage is it? I mean, this is a question that Wally Hope brought up, and a question that I'm still bringing up. I mean, I'm a bit less regular. They have these meetings where English Heritage say that interested parties in the summer solstice at Stonehenge, etc., can come to them and talk to them. But these meetings are basically the equivalent of banging your head on a wall for an hour and then going and giving yourself a rub down with sandpaper. You know, it's painful, the progress we can make. Obviously, English Heritage very much wanting to keep themselves in control of Stonehenge. Maggie Thatcher, with another friend of ours, set out to destroy the festival at Stonehenge. I think it's another man. And on the 1st of June 1985, she did exactly that. A convoy of 140 vehicles, which was moving to take the land at Stonehenge, was funnelled by Wiltshire, Thames Valley and Hampshire police along a predestined route until they got to a point where they put 3 council lorries across the road to block it off. The travellers took a side road, which was their only alternative to being stopped at this roadblock, and an ambush was waiting for them, and it became known as the Battle of the Beanfield. It's something that I'm trying to regress, because normally a battle needs 2 sides. These were people, and the policemen had been told that there could be guns on board, that we would have weapons, that we would have this, that and the other, but a lot of people travelling to Stonehenge were families, their children there, you know, there's even grandmothers on the peace convoy on that day. And yeah, and I've talked to a couple of coppers who were on duty on that day, and they didn't know what, you know, they'd gone on all hyped up expecting us to be up in arms, etc., and to give them a kick in, and they ended up, you know, really laying in to the peaceful people of Stonehenge. These are some of Alan Lodge's shots of Beanfield as he was there. Everyone being arrested, or processed as they like to call it. I mean, they had courts all over Wiltshire, Hampshire, up into Oxfordshire, Berkshire, etc. All these special courts which they'd set up in advance. But they still found that they had too many people. They were locking up people, 6 people in a police garage out the back of a police station in one case. You know, they were, you know, no toilet facility or anything. People just being stuck in garages to await processing. There's another one being taken off to be processed. Yeah, yeah. Later on that day they came in heavy again to finish off the job. And I mean, many people were hospitalised, many people needing treatment after the Beanfield. Most of the vehicles left in a state that weren't, you know, they were no longer roadworthy. I mean, there's actually shots of policemen carrying axes, etc., which were used to smash up people's homes. And when you see some of the footage from buses afterwards, there's broken kids' toys, like you have a rattle, and it's been broken in half deliberately. You've got a kid's guitar with all the strings pulled off. You know, they really did. I mean, the buses were, yeah, people's homes, and they just went through them, smashing everything they could. And obviously, in the process, some of the inhabitants got smashed. Another picture from that dark day. A few more. Yeah, there's Nick Davis, who was writing for the Observer at the time, and it's a day that changed his life greatly. You know, I mean, a lot of the press had been told to leave the field. He had refused. Kim Sabido of ITN was another person whose life was majorly changed that day. You know, he said there must be a public inquiry. I mean, he'd been being a war reporter and everything, and he said he'd never seen security forces using that much force against people, and that there should surely be a public inquiry. But unfortunately, there never was. That's what I mean. I mean, look at this child. You know, I actually know this child, Richie, and you know, the parents and the children after this. I mean, post-traumatic stress. You know, I mean, some of these people were seriously scarred, and some people seriously are still scarred. The Scottish Rose, Karen, I'm even in touch with the baby, you know, I mean, we were a tribe and they set out to destroy our tribe. more pictures. This is Phil the Beer's fire engine. It's a beautiful wagon. It was blue, it was gold, it had flags flying up on the top of it. And he'd been driving around in the bean field. As they were arresting him and taking him away from his vehicle, they took him up to the crest of the hill and they forced him to kneel down and turn round. And they said, you see that smoke? They said, that smoke's your home. And they torched Phil Beer's fire engine. The picture, strangely enough, that picture got sent to me, it had an agenda written at the top of it. They very much had an agenda. Next year marks, 2015 is 30 years since Beanfield, and we're hoping that some more stuff is let out, about the government orders, etc. for that day. And unfortunately Thatcher is dead. And at the end of the day, I lay the blame firmly and squarely at her door. But there's still a few of them alive, so we'll give them a bit of a run for their money, and maybe even get it to a public inquiry this late in the game. The other Cardigan luckily gave the people who managed to have vehicles that were able to be driven off the beanfield after the police operation finished, went back to his land at Savanack Forest. Now the police came down the following day and said, he was chairman of the Conservative Association in the area. He was seen to be, he was a major landowner, the Cardigan, etc. And they said, can we come onto your land to finish the job? And he said, well, if finishing the job means doing anything like you did yesterday, no. And as I say, sanctuary, these people were really messed up by the day before. And that man David, he's a good man. Oh, that one's popped up again, sorry about that. We still want our stones back. This is one of the lovely paintings, posters that came out in 1985. These Romans are crazy. Asterisk with his anarchy sign on. Obviously the festival movement and that kept on growing. The press, who were out to get the, because they worked with the government largely, they were out, and the years after 1985 were a cat and mouse game. Okay. Basically, the newspapers putting up massive headlines, hippie scum, sponging scum, etc. This is when we tried to get to Stonehenge in 1886, and they got us all onto a disused airfield in the New Forest, Stony Cross, with the inevitability, the Forestry Commission coming to claim back the land, people being forced off the land. This is them having an argument when the police are sort of saying they can't move any further. They were marching basically from the New Forest up to Glastonbury, Worthy Farm. Many people getting stopped on the way. I'm going to have to skip through them a bit because I do as I usually do, get too involved. As I say, they're walking all the way from the New Forest up to Glastonbury. Here they are at Glastonbury in 1986. Very much, you can't read it properly, but it says risen from the trashes. It's a phoenix coming out of a flame, risen from the trashes, peace convoy, And this was hey up Maggie, we're still here. At Glastonbury in 1987, we built our own Stonehenge, and we had a Stonehenge in Exile festival. And it sort of seemed like the Stonehenge festival had moved on, carry on being at Glastonbury. It's a partnership that worked for quite a few years. Skim on through these. There's people living on fields at Glastonbury. Stonehenge the whole time is a no-go area. They have a massive exclusion zone. You're not allowed within 5 miles. More of the people making sure we don't go to Hartland. This is a map that I was given in 1986 saying where I could and couldn't go. Stonehenge in that triangle in the middle. I did go inside. There we go, more signs saying we can't go further. Public Order Act, and this was followed up quite closely by the Criminal Justice Act. The campaign's still going on for Stonehenge. Hillary became a major figure in the Stonehenge campaign, Dice George at the back, arguing with the police about our rights. This is the autumn equinox in 1986, where people were still allowed to get into the stones and celebrate. George Firstoff, who became a major figure in our struggle. I'll have to skip through a few of these quickly, Dave. Yeah, Sid Rawle again. Stonehenge 1988, that was pivotal. English Heritage was starting to have trouble with the government. We still intended to go back to Stonehenge, whatever riot police, etc. were against us. And this was the inevitable result. Aggro lasting all night, massive lines of riot police. The fence comes down, the barriers go over, but it's a standoff. That's as far into the field at Stonehenge as we got. 4 or 5 people sitting up on top of the hillstone. But it was, yet again, a claim of our right to be there. Stonehenge 89, we're still campaigning to be there. There's me hanging around in 1989 with a young child in arm, because this is still a place that we wanted to teach our children was our own place. There we are again, being kept away from the hillstone. And Glastonbury 90, now that's a really sad story. Basically, trouble between security and travellers erupted. There was quite a lot of damage. Basically, security had heavied up a couple of travellers, broken a collarbone and given them quite a good kicking. So by the time the message got up to the travellers' field, people were angry. They went down. Anyone who was on security got a bit of a trashing. And that marks the end of the peaceful collaborations with Michael Eavis. And from that moment on, New Age travellers aren't allowed. But there were plenty of other festivals. This one was the Avon Free Festival. It ended up being scooted all the way up to Gloucester from Avon. And another one, Dave. There's a band called Spiral Tribe, a sound system that were involved in 1991, 92. We ended up having a massive party up at Castle Morton. Let's get another one, mate. Yeah, as you can see, massive. I mean, we're talking about 30,000 people going, listening to music. I mean, Castle Morton lasted for 2 weeks. People still travelling in convoys, wanting to live together, wanting to live communally. There's my stage up in the left corner. Basically, these are, I'm going to skip through a few. Spiral Tribe getting arrested after Castle Morton. They tried to put all sorts of charges over on them. None of them stuck. Ended up being no criminal charges. They pushed forward the Criminal Justice Bill, which was massively opposed. This is the gates at the end of Downing Street. I mean, this is how angry people were about the Criminal Justice Bill. It basically said we couldn't get together and party. 1999, major year. We reclaimed Stonehenge. We got in through the police lines. We got in over the fences. And we retook Stonehenge. We said, we are the people of Stonehenge. We want our Stonehenge back. 1999, as I say, a major year, because the following year they started to deal with this. They started to allow the open access that still runs now. Still massively policed, etc. As you can see, the RAC, everyone go along to the Solstice car park. It'll be awfully nice. Don't put up any tents, don't play any music, don't do anything, don't have fun. And we'll let you see stones. Some people think, oh, yeah, but like I say, we're getting good numbers at Stonehenge again. I mean, each year it is growing and growing. I mean, this summer solstice we had, I think it was 37,000, was it they said, Kat? 37,000 people. Stonehenge is ours and will remain ours, and what access we can get, we will fight for. Wherever you go there for. It's Helen Hatt, who's the person who looked after Wally's box before me. This is her at Stonehenge. I mean, she's a major figure in Wally's story. But yeah, there's me and Helen. That's actually an illegal boombox that we smuggle into Stonehenge every summer solstice. It amplifies, and we tell the story of Stonehenge. We tell the story of Wally Hope. We amplify his poems. English Heritage don't like it, but that's right, we don't like English Heritage. And they'll have to put up with this. Is the box on the bean field, marking the, there's some ugly geezer over there, carry on from that one. In 2001, this low crop circle appeared. I thought this would interest some of the more Fortean people. Obviously a prank, but that is the logo of the anarcho band Crass, who, like I said, helped set up Stonehenge Festival. There's still, as I say, these are private security companies, police, massive, we're not allowed. You walk down through a bottleneck, have your bags gone through twice, all sorts of goods are confiscated. Strangely, they let alcohol in, I can't imagine why. And basically, I mean, I've been strip searched trying to get into Stonehenge, a place that I regard as my temple. That's not me going off as strip searching, but no doubt he'll be charged with something. The Ancestor, a lovely statue we got delivered to us for the open access, hailing down the moon. But no, their forces are still there telling us what we can and can't do, and we want freedom. We want our Stonehenge back. We want to live to the idea of, to the dreams of Wally. He said that the children of Albion should be able to dance in the shadow of the great stones. And we're still making sure they can dance in the shadows of the great stones. And this is what they've got. They've got a monopoly. Kat found this. This is actually for sale in their gift shop. You know, the man with all the money, holding guard over Stonehenge, declaring his monopoly. Look at this, the fast-dealing property trading game, English heritage. You know, I like that one. Thanks, Pat. I love you for that one. Yeah, this is where I come from. Whose heritage? You know, I say to you that it's our heritage. You know, our ancestors, you know, we believe in reincarnation. Our ancestors may have been the people who built Stonehenge, who did services at Stonehenge, who visited throughout its thousands of years. And I do this for the loving memory of Wally Hope, and I'm really glad you all came along and listened to this. Nice one, John, for letting me be here. I put out with this conversation.
I think the story of Wally Hope is enormously important, and it's something that should be known by every man, woman or child in this country. That is the reason why I asked Dean to come here and talk about it today. It has its Fortean overtones. There are stories that Wally performed some magical miracles when he was still alive, which I'm sure Dean will talk about if you want to come find him in the bar or somewhere afterwards. Well, wherever, you know what I mean. The fact that his mortal remains are immortal. The fact they are carried around the festivals, the sacred sites, and they're here at the Weird Weekend. I feel that Wally Hope is our guest of honour this year. But the real big reason that I wanted Dean to come tell this story is because I have a horrible feeling that some of you people here probably believe that we live in a fair and equitable society. We don't. Some of you probably believe that we live in a society where the government tells the truth to us. And that's where cryptozoology comes in. If the government, as we know, the government repeatedly lies about all sorts of things, if the government, and let's face it, the government in 1975 were no better and no worse than the government we have now, if they can judicially murder Wally Hope, if they can tell these goddamn appalling lies, why should we believe them when they say there are no big cats in the Devon countryside? Why should we believe them when they say that the species is extinct, so there's no need to spend any more money on them on a particular nature reserve? Why should we believe them when they say anything? Like Dean, I was politicised by the writings of Penny Rambo about 30 years ago. Dean had a go at me the other night because I was talking to Lars about rules of taxonomy. You say, we don't have any rules, no rules. I said, yeah, we have rules as zoology do, but that's about it. Thank you very much for coming, Dean, and thank you very much, everybody, from such a wide range of ages and backgrounds who found that talk as fascinating and as moving as I did. Now, young people, you want cake, don't you? Young people, up those stairs, we have a cake eating competition. Now, my lovely wife, wherever she is, lovely wife, can you wave your hands in the air, please? Lovely wife, oi, that's her, that's lovely wife up there. She's taking names for the dinner tomorrow night. The dinner costs a £5. It costs a £5 and you can also buy your pudding. So please, go and give your names to my lovely wife. And now, we're going to listen to some music for half an hour. We are running half an hour late. And you will be back very soon for Britain Falls. Music, maestro, please.
Sorry, at the end of that ceremony, someone put...
Strangely strange, but oddly normal.